we're going to do in this session is we are going to investigate microbes that grow in mud, and we're going to do an experiment together where we're going to build something that should have some really cool results later on. So I'm just going to share my screen with you so that I can show you a couple of slides. Oh, I cannot share my screen. Just one second. Just want to show you a couple of introductory slides, but I am having some technical difficulties. Aha, right, okay, that might now be working. Just give me one moment. Hooray, excellent. Okay, so going to open this up. Hopefully you can see my screen here. Whoops, let's change that. There we go. Okay, so yes, so fantastic. We can begin. So yes, this session is going to be looking at microbes that grow in mud. So just before we begin, I'm going to give you a quick reminder of the list of things you're going to need. If you signed up for this session in advance, and hopefully you were already provided with a list of things you would need, but if you're joining live, then you might not know. So this is time for you to try and scramble this, or maybe make a list for later. The first thing we're going to need is a clear container. So you need a drinks bottle or a jar. It can be glass or plastic, it doesn't really matter. Tall things work better than short things. But the important thing is that it is transparent, so not coloured glass, but just clear glass. You're also going to need some mud, enough mud to fill your container 2/3 full. So if you have a massive drinks bottle, you're going to need a lot of mud. If you're using something small, then you won't need so much. The other important ingredient is water. So I have mentioned in the email that went out to you that you needed water that came from some outdoor source. So you can get water from a pond or a river or a puddle, or any rainwater source is completely fine. Preferably don't use tap water unless you have to. And this is just because tap water usually has chlorine in it, which will inhibit the growth of the microbes we're working with, and we want to encourage as much stuff to grow as possible. So if you can get your water from a pond or a river, then that's brilliant. We also need to provide some extra nutrients for the microbes in our jar. So we're going to need to give them an egg yolk. Doesn't matter if it's cooked or raw. Also an egg shell, and we also need to give it some paper, so tissue or newspaper or anything like that is fine. I can see that someone has raised their hand. If you have a question, please just pop it in the chat box and I can answer that for you. Depending on what kind of container you're using, you're going to need to get this mud in there. So you might need a funnel, or you might be able to spoon it. But I leave that up to you, what kind of method you need for getting it into your container. The last thing we're going to add is going to be a bonus item. So this is optional. You don't have to add this in. But if you can get something like an iron nail, or a chunk of soap, or a vitamin tablet, or anything that you think might affect how things grow, then chuck it in there and we'll see whether it has an effect. Oh yes, and I just need to remind you that if your working area should be relatively clear and easy to clean, because you might spill some stuff while you're working, and I don't want you to get mud on anything that can't be cleaned. So just make sure that you're somewhere that's safe at the moment, and you might need to have an adult to give you a hand with some of these steps. So A couple of people are saying that they're just grabbing their things and can I wait? So I'm just going to do a little intro bit now. So please feel free if you're gathering bits together to do so while I'm doing the introduction. And yes, sorry, I can also point out that if you don't have everything right now, you can rewatch this video later because it is going to be recorded and you can then do it in your own time when you've gathered everything. So let's see if I can move on to my next slide. Fantastic. Okay, so we're talking today about bacteria. I've been calling them microbes because they are microscopic living things. And people are asking questions which are excellent that I'm going to get onto in just a moment. Thank you. Bacteria live in almost every environment on Earth. They live inside you even. So you have bacteria in your gut, on your skin, up your nose, and they're vitally important for keeping you healthy. Some bacteria also make people sick, but most of the bacteria in your body are really important for keeping you healthy. And soil is the same kind of situation. So when we are looking at the microbes in soil, they're vitally important for keeping the soil healthy and for supporting the growth of the plants that are growing in that soil. If you had just 1 gram of soil, you would have as many as 10 billion bacteria in there. So it's a really rich source of microbial life. And when I'm talking about bacteria, I'm talking about microscopically tiny single-celled living things. So mud it seems as though mud is quite simple stuff, but in actual fact, it's quite complicated. So mud is in different layers at different depths, and it has different nutrients in it. And because of all these microbes that are living in it, it's actually like a mega city. So all of these bacteria are busy doing different jobs and interacting with each other in different ways, and they all like to live in slightly different conditions in the soil. The experiment we're going to do today was actually invented more than 100 years ago by a Russian microbiologist whose name was Sergei Vinogradsky. And he discovered that if you put soil into a container and give it some extra nutrients, that you can store it in sunlight, and the microbes that are in that soil will start to grow. And as some of them start to grow, they will support the growth of other microbes, and they will support the growth of other microbes. And you get basically like an ecosystem in a container. So that's what we're hoping to achieve today. We're going to set up our own Vinogradsky columns. Someone has asked in the chat whether this is like a microhabitat. So yes, that's exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at the tiny differences in within our container, tiny differences in the environment, which mean that some bacteria want to grow in some places, but don't want to grow in other places. So yes, microhabitats is exactly what we're looking at inside this container. So I was inspired really to do this workshop with you today because of a project that I was working on called PuntSeek, which I'm going to tell you about very briefly before we get going. So PuntSeek was a project that started a few years ago where some researchers got on a punt and sailed up the River Cam. So that's the river that runs through Cambridge City. And you can see on this map in the top corner with the rainbow colours, they went up the river and they collected samples of water from different places along the river. And they then went back at different times of year and went to the same spots and collected more samples. And we then analysed that water to look at what kind of bacteria were living in the river. And the results were super interesting. So we found that different places in the river, for example, in the city versus out in the countryside, had completely different kinds of bacteria living in the river. And also throughout the year, as the year progressed, the microbes that we saw changed too. So really inspired by this project that we were doing, I thought it would be really cool to look at these kind of environmental microbes with you as well in the comfort of your own home. So let's get going. Let's make a mud jar. Hopefully you have the things that you need to hand, and I'm going to go through it with you now. So I will just stop sharing my screen so that you can hopefully see me a bit better. There's me again. Okay, so as I said, the first thing that we need is going to be a container. So have something ready to hand. I'm using a jam jar. And the thing that goes at the bottom of our container is the extra nutrients. So I said that you needed an eggshell and egg yolk. I have these in a bowl here that I'm not going to pour all over my table. We need to smash up the eggshell and mix it with the egg yolk. So if you have a spoon or something to hand, that would be great. So you don't have to do this with your hands. You just want to break up the eggshell if you haven't already. Smash it up. It doesn't have to be down to powder, just broken into pieces. And mix it together with your egg yolk. And then as we're doing that, we can also add some paper. So the egg yolk is providing some sulfur that some of the bacteria need. The eggshell is providing calcium carbonate, and we also want to give them a source of carbon. So I've just got some tissue paper here. I'm going to shred up and mix in. Someone has just asked to clarify, does this need to be a container with a lid? If it is a container that already has a lid, that's great. If you have a container which doesn't have a lid, then we can make a covering with cling film at the end. So it doesn't have to be a container with a lid. We'll make a lid for it at the end. So I'm just shredding this tissue right now. I'll just pop my bowl here so you can see what I'm doing. So you need to shred your newspaper or your tissue paper as small as you can. And then we need to mix that paper. In case I didn't specify how much paper, it's about a handful of paper. It doesn't need to be very precise. When you have shredded your paper into your bowl, whoops, what I'm trying to do here, then you want to just mix it all together with your yolk and your shell. So your smashed up shell and your egg yolk, you want it to be really coating that paper, and it will make a horrible sticky mess. I am being reminded that I should also specify that if you are not able to do this along with me, and if you need time to grab the things, that the talk is going to be recorded, and everyone will be able to do it in their own time later on if they would like to. So if you think this is interesting, but you're not able to do it along with me, then that's fine. You can do it again later. Okay, so I have a horrible mess of paper and egg in my bowl. What we need to do now is add some mud. So depending on how big your container is, you need to add about as much mud as will fill your container 1/3. So for my jam jar, I'm going to use about that much mud. So I have collected a great big bowl of mud here, and I'm just going to spoon that into my bowl of egg. So should be roughly enough mud that you could fill your container 1/3 full is how much you need here. Someone has just asked me to clarify why the water needs to be from outside. The first thing is that water that comes from a river or a pond will already have microbes in it. So that's all great because it's going to add more life to your jar. But as well as that, if you use tap water, there is usually chlorine added to tap water, which they do because it keeps the water clean on its way to your taps. However, if you have chlorine in the water that you add to this jar, it might mean that some more delicate bacteria have struggle to grow in that water. So really we want to give them every chance that they can have to grow abundantly. So we want to use some nice outdoor water because it will be clean and won't have any chlorine or any other chemicals in it. So it should be nice and neutral for the bugs to grow in. Okay, so what I am doing here, someone has asked me, lots of questions. I apologize that I didn't see the question. Could I get my water from the ocean, someone says. Now that's a really interesting point. There are a lot of microbes living in ocean water, and I would be fascinated to see what happened if you did get your water from the ocean and compared it to a jar that had water from a stream or a pond, because I'm sure it would grow completely different bacteria. Obviously, water from the ocean is salty. Some bacteria don't like living in salty conditions. Some bacteria have no problem with it. So I would be absolutely fascinated to see what happens if you did this with seawater. Okay, so I have mixed together my mud, my eggshell, and my egg yolk, and it's pretty disgusting. So now we want to pop this in the bottom of our container. So this should be roughly 1/3 at the bottom of your container, but it doesn't need to be exact. So I'm just going to spoon it in because I have a jar. I don't need to funnel it. If you're using something that has a very narrow neck, like a drinks bottle, then this might be a little bit tricky. So take your time and try not to make too much mess. But we just want to get all of this egg and shell and paper into the bottom of our jar. This is very sticky. Okay. So someone has asked where my mud came from. So I've actually got my water and my mud today from a meadow, I guess, that's down by the river, not far from my house. Basically, it's some like, it's not farmed land, it's not someone's garden, it's just sort of wild, unused land. And I got some mud from next to the river, and I've got my water from the river as well. But you can get mud from absolutely anywhere. It really doesn't matter. And it's quite interesting to compare the difference between if you had mud from the woods, for example, compared to mud in your garden, compared to mud from, as I say, from next to a river, or even the silt at the bottom of a pond, something like this. They're all going to grow different microbes and you'll get different results, which will be really exciting. Okay, so hopefully you have something that looks not too dissimilar to this. So I have a layer of mud at the bottom, but I'm just making sure it's nice and flat. And that mud is mixed in with bits of paper and eggshell and egg yolk. Someone is asking whether they could use compost. That's really interesting. I don't know what kind of microbes you would have in compost that you just bought from the shop, but no doubt it does have something living in it. So yeah, it would probably work. And I'm not sure exactly what it would grow, but it will probably look different to my river mud. So, okay. We have our bottom third. If you are using a bonus item today, and you don't have to, then this is the moment to add it on top of your layer, on top of your bottom layer. So I'm using a lump of soap. We have solid soap in our house, and I don't know exactly what this is going to do because I haven't tried this before, but I know that some bacteria like to eat the fatty stuff that the soap is made from. So I figure that maybe something in my soil will also like to eat it. So that's what I'm going to experiment with today. You can put your bonus item just up against the side of your jar so you can see what it does. So you could be using anything, a rusty nail or something like that, and you can just pop it up against the side. I'm noticing someone is asking about egg white. You could probably add egg white as well. People always say that you should just use egg yolk. I think there is also a source of sulfur in egg white as well. But yes, you're always instructed to use egg yolk instead of egg white. So someone says, can you use manure? Wow, you'd get really, really stinky stuff growing in your jar if you use manure. Yeah, absolutely. So manure has tons of microbial life in it, obviously, because it came from the gut of an animal. But because it came from the gut of an animal, it's probably going to be pretty stinky, and this is going to sit in your house for a while. So you could use manure, and it would be quite interesting to compare, as I say, what happens if you fill one with manure and one that you've got mud from the garden with. Okay, so I have my bonus item tucked up against the side. The next thing we're going to do is to just pop a layer of plain mud on top. I'm wary of time here because I've been nattering to you folks for so long. So all we need to do is pour plain mud, so it's not mixed with anything, it's just the mud that I got out of the ground, and we're going to fill it until it is 2/3 full. So not completely full, but about 2/3 full in your container. That's what I'm doing here. When I get to, whoops, pouring it all over the table as well. Okay. All right, so I'm around about 2/3 full over here. So what you should now have is eggy layer at the bottom, plain mud on top with your bonus item tucked in against the side. And the last thing we're going to add is our water on top. Now, as I say, had to go down to the river to collect some water this morning. Someone is just asking for clarification on what they can use instead of tissue paper. You can use paper, you can use card, you can use anything like that will work fine, absolutely fine. Someone says, can you use rainwater? 100%, rainwater is brilliant, yeah. I don't have a water butter or anything in my garden, so I just went and grabbed some water from the river. So now what we're going to do is just carefully, so we don't disturb the layers, just pour your water on top of your mud and just let it soak in. And you want to have your water so it's not quite at the top of your jar, but it is nearly full, just a very small air gap at the top. Someone says, can you put the egg mud on top? So usually the reason we're putting the egg at the bottom is because the microbes that use that sulfur don't like living in air. They don't like having oxygen, and they use sulfur instead. So ideally, you want your egg to be at the bottom layer. It probably won't do any harm to also have egg at the top, but the egg at the bottom is the bit that's going to be used by the microbes that need to have that sulfur at the bottom of your jar. Okay, so here we have got, hopefully you can see, water, plain mud, and then our eggy mud is at the bottom. Now, I want to very quickly show you how this is going to go. So if you have a lid for your container, brilliant, pop the lid on now so you don't spill it. If you don't have a lid for your container, you can put some cling film over the top and seal it with an elastic band. I'm going to very, very quickly show you some pictures of what you can expect to happen. So if I try and share my screen again with you, then hopefully, there we go. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen again. So we're going to need to let these jars sit for a while. They need to sit somewhere where they've got sunlight. So sitting them on a windowsill is a great idea. At the very beginning, as you can see in this picture, it's just mud with some water on top. But after a few days, probably the first thing you'll start to see growing is actually algae, not bacteria. So algae are not bacteria. They're more related to plants. But they grow super fast and they'll grow in your water layer on the top. So your water will go bright green. And that's what you can see in this photo of the green jar here. You will probably see some colors start to appear in your mud, but most of your mud will still be brown at the beginning. Now, what we're hoping to see is, if I can take you on to the next picture, as you let your jar sit somewhere that's nice and bright and warm, the bacteria will start to grow. Now, we can't see individual bacteria, but we can see millions of bacteria when they start to grow all together. And some bacteria may produce different colors. So what we should see is that the bacteria that like living in certain conditions will see a stripe or a patch of color where those conditions are. And then other parts of the jar will have other conditions. This is a jar that I made with my daughter at the beginning of lockdown. And we kept that going until she went back to school. And what you can see is that as each week goes by, there's this bloom of green that you can see in the mud that starts to really develop, and also some red at the bottom of the jar. What she was really looking forward to was the purple. She really wanted to see purple bacteria because it's her favorite color. And eventually we did get purple bacteria, which was fantastic. That took about 7 weeks. So as I was saying, that the conditions in the jar are modified by the different types of bacteria as they produce different products that support other bacteria. This whole cycle that allows everything to grow in the jar is going to take probably, it can take 7 or 8 weeks. It depends on how warm it is and things like this. That's how long you can expect your entire experiment to run for. You might want to take a diary of what changes on your jar, or like maybe take a photo each week to see how it's changing. Someone asked me whether the green stuff that's growing is moss. In that last picture, it really does look quite mossy. This is actually a biofilm, like just a layer of algae in the water at the top of the jar is what that is. So it's not moss, it's algae. You can see loads more examples online if you want to see what happens to them, because they go all sorts of different colors depending on what kind of soil you use and what kind of water you use and what kind of nutrients you add. So if you search in your favorite search engine for Vinogradsky columns, then you will see some really cool examples of what people have achieved with this. I would also say that, so Puntseek, the project that I've been involved in, we've set up a photo album. We would love to see the kind of things that you grow. So you can head over to the Puntseek website and you can upload a photograph of your jar, so we can see what kind of things grow. And the thing that's cool about this experiment is that if your mud has been collected from your garden, it's going to be different to the mud in someone else's garden. If you've got your water from the sea, you're going to grow completely different things to someone who's got their water from a lake. So everybody ought to see slightly different colors and different bacteria growing in their jars. Someone asks whether you can use food coloring. That would definitely be cheating. You shouldn't need to use food coloring. If you let it sit for long enough, you'll get some really bright colors developing. Like I say, I only got a little bit of purple in my last one, but sometimes you get tons of purple growing at the bottom of the jar. And depending on what it is you've added as your bonus item, you might encourage even more interesting colored things to grow. People are asking whether they might get lichen growing in their jar. So in sort of 8 weeks time, I think that's not really enough time for you to get any significant growth of things like lichen. Probably anything that you're seeing growing below the soil level in your jar is going to be bacterial, and that's what we're hoping for. When you get to the end of your 8 weeks, it's completed its cycle. And if you want to dispose of your jar, then you can do. The contents is all fine to chuck in your garden, obviously, so you can just toss it in the garden or in your green waste bin. And as I say, I would absolutely love to see photographs of the kind of things that happen to your jars. So please pop along to the website, or you can follow Puntseek on the socials, and you'll be able to see what kind of things happened. Someone has asked whether they can use egg white. I actually don't know what happens if you use egg white. They usually recommend that you use egg yolk. I don't know if there's a different amount of sulfur in egg yolk to how much there is in egg white. That might be what the reason is. But if you threw the whole egg in there, it probably wouldn't do any harm, if I'm honest. It'll probably work fine. But usually they recommend that you use egg yolk rather than egg white. So yeah, I'm going to pop my jar onto the windowsill and I'm going to see how it grows. And as I say, I would love to see what sort of results you get as well. So please, if you've been handling raw egg and mug, don't forget to wash your hands. And before you eat anything or before you do anything like that, tidy up any mud that you've poured all over the floor, because I certainly have. And thank you so much for taking part in this session, and I look forward to seeing what kind of results you get. So thank you very much.